Welcome to class, everyone. Grab a seat. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer. We're going to completely reframe how we look at history today. We often think of globalization as this incredibly modern thing, maybe starting with the internet or international air travel. But the deeply interconnected world we live in, it actually began long before Christopher Columbus even thought about setting sail. So in today's lecture, we're going to explore the massive, vibrant, and incredibly sophisticated societies that existed all across the globe back then, and see exactly how those early civilizations literally laid the groundwork for our modern society.
Okay, here's our syllabus for today. First, the pre-1492 world. Second, the complex Americas. Third, Europe on the brink. Fourth, wealthy empires of Africa. And finally, number 5, the roots of the modern world. Let's dive in.
Section 1. The pre-1492 world. A crowded planet.
Right out of the gate, we need to completely dismantle a very persistent myth. The Americas were absolutely not some empty wilderness just waiting patiently to be quote-unquote discovered. As you can see on the 1507 Waldseemüller map, if you look over at the far left edge, there's just this tiny, kind of speculative sliver of land. That right there shows just how little Europe actually knew about the massive land masses across the Atlantic. They had a profoundly limited view of the globe, which really sets up that whole historical misconception of a new world. Because, spoiler alert, it wasn't new at all. The planet was already incredibly crowded, and the Americas were home to millions of people in highly organized societies. It was really only new to Europe.
Section 2. The complex Americas. Civilizations of the New World. So, take a look at this massive span of time. By the time Columbus showed up, complex civilizations hadn't just suddenly appeared. They had been thriving here for literally thousands of years. But the absolute most crucial milestone on this timeline is right at the very beginning. Around 5000 BCE, Mesoamericans domesticated corn, or maize. And this agricultural revolution, it was a total game changer. It allowed populations to explode and settle into permanent cities. It's actually a perfect example of early civilizations influencing us right now, because that exact same domesticated crop literally still feeds the world today. Let's quickly define a key vocabulary term for today's lecture: Mesoamerica. Stretching all the way from north of Panama up into central Mexico, this region was a massive cradle of civilization. It birthed the Olmec mother culture, the Maya, and eventually the Aztecs. We're talking about complex, polytheistic societies that built monumental edifices, developed advanced math, and really importantly, created the only known written language in the Western Hemisphere. To truly grasp their genius, consider El Castillo at Chichen Itza, built by the Maya. Now, this isn't just a temple, it's a massive stone astronomical calendar. Seriously, if you count the steps on all 4 sides and add the top platform, it totals exactly 365 steps. Their priest astronomers mathematically mapped the solar year perfectly, just to direct their planting and harvesting cycles. And this brings us to a brilliant myth-busting moment. On one side, we've got a rendering of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlán. It was built right on a lake with incredible organized causeways, floating gardens, fresh aqueducts, and even a dedicated trash collection system. The Aztecs literally bathed every single day. Now compare that to the classic walled cities of feudal Europe like Carcassonne. European cities back then were often super cramped, fetid, and almost completely lacking in sanitation. The contrast in urban planning here is just absolutely staggering. To help us really internalize the awe-inspiring scale of Aztec civilization, listen to this visceral quote from Bernal Diaz del Castillo. He was a Spanish soldier who arrived with Hernán Cortés. He wrote, "When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water and other great towns on dry land, we were amazed, and some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream. It was a metropolis, larger and wealthier than almost anything in Europe at the time, housing upwards of 200,000 people." Let's shift south down to the Andes Mountains to look at the vast Inca Empire. The Inca managed a highly organized territory stretching 2,500 miles across treacherous mountain terrain. But here's the wild part. They did it entirely without a written alphabet. Instead, they used the quipu. Imagine trying to manage millions of subjects across a massive empire using only this incredibly intricate system of colored strings and knots to communicate, keep tax records, and enforce laws. It's brilliant.
And we see incredible environmental adaptations up in North America too. Take a look at the Anasazi cliff dwellings in the present-day American Southwest. They were carved directly into steep cliffs for protection. And further east, you had the massive Mississippian trading hub of Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis. That city featured huge earthen pyramids and was home to over 10,000 people.
Section 3. Europe on the Brink, Recovery and Expansion. Okay, pivoting back across the Atlantic. To understand Europe's mindset during these same centuries, we really have to look at their recent trauma. In the 1340s, the bubonic plague, the Black Death, absolutely ravaged the continent. As the chart shows, it wiped out a full third of Europe's population. This sheer massive loss of life led to a highly reorganized society that started relying heavily on the Catholic Church for spiritual answers and social structure. But by 1450, populations were rebounding, and a rejuvenated Europe was teetering on the brink of tremendous change.
Well, one of the primary catalysts for that change was the Crusades. While these were religious wars fought for the Holy Land, they had this massive, unintended economic consequence. Returning crusaders brought back a taste for Eastern luxury goods. Suddenly, Europe had an insatiable appetite for silk, porcelain, sugar, and spices. But the overland route, the Silk Road, was incredibly costly and controlled by Muslim middlemen, so Europeans desperately needed to find a cheaper, direct sea route.
And that brings us to the famous God, glory, and gold motives for European exploration. Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella had just completed the Reconquista, pushing Muslims out of Spain, so they were driven by intense religious zeal, that's the God part, to spread Catholicism. Then there was glory, fueled by tales of adventure from literature, like the writings of Marco Polo. And finally, gold, the pressing economic drive for unprecedented wealth, spices, and a way to completely bypass those middlemen.
Section 4. Wealthy Empires of Africa, Trade and Islam.
Now let's travel over to our third continent to understand the final major geographic player in the pre-1492 world, West Africa. Looking at the map, you can see the sheer vastness of the West African empires prior to 1500, specifically Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. These were incredibly wealthy trading states. And notice the role of Islam here. As Islam spread across North Africa, it brought not just a unifying faith, but a shared political and legal framework that seamlessly hooked these empires into broader Mediterranean and Middle Eastern trade networks.
Just to give you an idea of the absolutely staggering wealth of these empires, consider the ruler of Mali, Mansa Musa. During his pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, he handed out so much gold along his route that it literally caused serious regional price inflation. I mean, just imagine having that level of wealth. It really highlights the massive, valuable resources like gold and salt that were constantly flowing out of the African interior.
Now, it's also absolutely critical to understand the institution of slavery within this context. Based on our source text, slavery in West Africa initially existed as a system of servitude stemming from tribal war or famine debt. However, this existing system was vastly expanded by Arab maritime traders and then fundamentally altered by the arrival of the Portuguese. They eventually turned it into a brutal, large-scale commercial enterprise specifically to fuel the new, intensely labor-demanding sugar plantations.
Section 5. Roots of the Modern World. The Continents Collide.
So what happened when these three distinct, highly developed spheres permanently intersected? Well, the foundational tragedy was a massive clash regarding land ownership. You see, indigenous societies generally viewed land as communal. The European concept of private, individual ownership largely didn't even exist to them. The European Christian worldview, however, saw land as a primary source of wealth, something divinely ordained to be subdued and exploited. This tragic, foundational culture clash would completely define the conflicts of the centuries following 1492.
Which brings us to 1492. Columbus persuades the Spanish monarchs to fund his voyage west. Now, educated people at the time already knew the Earth was round, but Columbus made a massive mathematical miscalculation. He vastly underestimated the Earth's circumference. He thought he was charting a super quick route to the East Indies. Evidently, he skipped geography class. Instead, he sailed straight into an ancient, highly populated hemisphere. The legacy of this massive collision literally built our present day. Think about it. Indigenous agriculture, like the domestication of corn and potatoes, completely revolutionized global diets and still feeds the modern world right now. Enslaved African labor was brutally harnessed to build early colonial wealth, and European economic motives sparked the permanent global maritime trade networks that completely define modern globalization.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as class wraps up today. We've clearly seen that the Americas were already crowded with millions of people living in highly advanced, complex civilizations long before European ships ever arrived. So I have to ask you, If the New World was already home to all these thriving societies, who really discovered whom? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes how you view the roots of our modern globalized world. See you next time.